Scenes described as concerted disorder by police as hundreds of climate change protesters descended on Britain's biggest coal-fired power station to protest against carbon emissions. Three pressure groups came together for the demonstration.
The administration is working actively with key members of Congress to implement a bill to put a cap on carbon pollution that would cut our emissions more than 16% from current levels by 2020 and 80% by 2050. Along with these efforts at home, I am working hard to demonstrate that America is back and ready to lead in international climate negotiations. There is no doubt about the urgency of the climate change crisis, and you will not hear anyone in this administration question the science. The time for denial, delay, and dispute is over, and the time to act is now.
Good morning, and welcome to this historically important hearing. When people look at Vice President Al Gore, they think of an award-winning movie, An Inconvenient Truth, and to win an Oscar and a Nobel Prize for, imagine this, a documentary on climate change.
Our country is at risk on three fronts. The economic crisis is clear. Most importantly, of course, we are, along with the rest of humanity, facing the dire and growing threat of the climate crisis. It is at the very heart of those threats that this committee and this Congress must direct its focus. I am here today to lend my support to what I believe to be one of the most important pieces of legislation ever introduced in the Congress. And each day that we wait, we increase the risk that we will leave our children and grandchildren an irreparably damaged planet. Passage of this legislation will restore America's leadership of the world and begin at long last to solve the climate crisis. And it is truly a moral imperative.
Hey, welcome back. It is Phil Valentine here, talking a little global warming for you. And I look, there's a lot of information out there, a lot of stories out there to talk about. Again, I cannot say this enough. I am for clean air and clean water. I have protested for clean air and clean water. Nobody in their right mind wants dirty air and dirty water. Am I right? Who are the people who scream the loudest about all this global warming? Hollywood types, right? Rock stars, Al Gore. What do they all have in common? Private planes flying all over the place, and then they want to go to the next event so they can land their private jet and get out and tell us that we need to do something about global warming. It's just...
And large entourages, don't forget that.
Oh, sure. These people are going to fly around the world and use all this energy with the lights and the sound and everything to stand up there and tell you that you need to lessen your carbon footprint. But, Al Gore is famous for tall tales and exaggerations and fabrications. This is the same Al Gore who said that he was the inspiration for Love Story, the same Al Gore who said he created the internet. Then he comes along and he says, the earth has a fever, and nobody questions it? Now, I know what you're thinking. Here's some fat cat talk show host who's in the hip pocket of big oil going to tell me about global warming. Well, it's not like that at all. I'm a conservationist at heart. A preservationist, really. Take this old car, for example. It's a 1985 Mercedes 300D that I run on biodiesel that I make here at the farm. Benny the Bio-Benz is his name, and Benny was in serious need of restoration when I bought him.
I've restored several cars over the years and renovated several houses. I just like things with a history, like this old cabin. It was originally built in 1874 and I saved it from the bulldozer. We had each log numbered and dismantled from its original location in West Tennessee and had it painstakingly reassembled here. You know, conservation is all about conserving, isn't it? Whether it's conserving the land or conserving an old log home or conserving the principles of our founding fathers. And that's what really scares me more than anything. It's the erosion of our freedoms and our liberties. And much of that, quite frankly, has come in the name of global warming. We're being told what light bulbs we can and can't use, how much water we can use, what kind of appliances we can buy, what kind of car we can drive. Now, I've made a choice to drive a biodiesel car. I make my own fuel by picking up used vegetable oil, and I haul the oil back to the farm where I turn it into biodiesel. Seriously, you think Al Gore is going to all this trouble? And I don't make my own biodiesel because of some fear of global warming. I do it because I get such a sense of independence. I guess it's that independent streak that made me question the so-called conventional wisdom that CO2 is destroying the planet. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, does it? That something we exhale and plants need for life is somehow a pollutant? Well, the more I dug, the more I discovered an inconsistent truth. Now, if you're a dirt person, this is the holy grail. Now, before we get too far into this, let's get some terminology straight. Dirt person. We're not talking about your typical citizen who maybe recycles and tries to conserve energy to make the earth a little better place. A dirt person is a fanatic. It's someone who's so obsessed with a global warming issue that they've radically changed their own lifestyle and they want to force you to do the same thing. It's this guy. They've been drinking too much of the Kool-Aid, also known as branch Algorians. This is the Goracle. This is where the man lives. This is Al Gore's house, his 10,000 square foot mansion. And we're going to come up here and see if we can get in to say hello.
For the last 25 years, we have had the preeminent scientific organization in the world, the 3,000 best scientists in the world from 113 countries, have issued 4 unanimous reports saying we've got to deal with it.
Have any of the IPCC reports ever been unanimous that you're aware of?
Al Gore usually exaggerates, or let's say prevaricates. There are about 152 climate scientists who contributed to the report.
Now wait a minute. Al Gore just said that there were 3,000 scientists.
The 3,000 best scientists in the world. The 3,000 best scientists in the world.
About 152 climate scientists who contributed to the report, according to the UK Met Office. The rest are hangers-on or people who reviewed the report, like me, and disagreed with it.
There's nothing unanimous about that.
Oh, of course not. Of course not.
According to the Met Office's website, the core climate science from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was written by 152 scientists from more than 30 countries, not 3,000.
The 3,000 best scientists in the world.
About 9 contributed to the crucial chapter, which is, what is the cause of global warming?
Congressman, you began by denying that there is a consensus on the science. There is a consensus on the science.
Well, you must have been listening to our testimony that we've had for the last few days with dozens of experts that have come in who have given completely different views.
Well,
I would encourage you to go back and look at the testimony this committee's heard.
There are people who still believe that the moon landing was staged on a movie lot in Arizona.
And neither of us are one of those, and I know you like giving those cute anecdotes. This is not a cutesy issue. We're talking about something that can export millions of jobs out of our economy, out of our country, and testimony's been given just to those numbers. So would you testify about the actual cost? Do you want to talk about the cost?
Man-made global warming pollution causes global warming. That's not a cutesy issue. It's not an open issue.
Well, no, science is not about consensus. In fact, everything that we've invented has overturned somebody else's theory that was believed beforehand. And so you don't want a consensus in science because that means science is stopped. Right. And that's what Al Gore wants. He wants to actually stop the science. That's why they declare a consensus. It's like declaring victory in a war. You declare victory, you walk away. You declare consensus, and you stop debate.
Two of the preeminent climate scientists in the country are at the University of Alabama at Huntsville, Dr. Roy Spencer and Dr. John Christie.
I've been a contributor to all the IPCCs and was the lead author of the 2001 IPCC.
Is this the one that won the Peace Prize?
Well, all of them won the Peace Prize, so I have a nice certificate in my office about being part of the Nobel Peace Prize.
So there's a difference between the IPCC study that comes out and the policymakers' summary that came out, and that's what everybody focused on, right? The policymakers' summary, they're able to just ignore what the lead author, like you would say, and just say we're going to pick and choose what we want to out of there of all these scientists.
Well, I think what happens is they create bullet points that the press will publish, and it's easier to make those very bold and punchy, and it does modify what complicated science is in the large documents behind those. I think I would have a very difficult time, if not impossible, trying to change one word of the policymaker summary.
Dick Lindzen recently came out with a paper which showed evidence from satellite observations that the climate system really isn't sensitive to how much CO2 we put into it. And he's not the first one to have published evidence like this. Others, myself included, have published papers like this. But even though they appear in the peer-reviewed scientific literature, these papers are just ignored.
Your notion that this planet's going to fry in 30 years, this Congress doesn't know what's going to happen in a week, let alone 30, 40 years.
Hello, Phil Valentine here. Just wondering if Al Gore could come out and do an interview with us for a few minutes.
What's the occasion?
We're doing a documentary on global warming. Peter Schweitzer wrote a blistering piece on Al Gore for USA Today. He noted that Gore's multiple homes weren't green at all. Shortly after the USA Today column, the Tennessee Center for Public Policy looked at Gore's power bills and found he was using 20 times the power of the average Nashville home. TCPP's then executive director, Drew Johnson, began to track Gore's power usage as he quickly tried to green his 10,000 square foot mansion. When he finished, Gore was using only 10 to 15 times the power of the average Nashville home and received the Gold Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design certification from the U.S. Green Building Council. They said short of tearing it down and starting anew, I don't know how it could have been rated any higher. Of course, they missed the point entirely. What is Gore doing living in a 10,000 square foot house? So this is Gore's power bill, right?
That's it right there.
And my understanding, this is running 10 to 20 times more than the average Nashville home.
As much as 20 times more than the average American household. And he made efforts to make his house greener, and even after that, we're talking 10 times more than the average household.
It's unbelievable. I mean, the hypocrisy is colossal.
Right up there with Ted Haggard or Jimmy Swaggart. He really is the king of hypocrites. Here's a guy who's brought really environmentalism to a religious level, and here this prophet of this religion doesn't walk the walk, doesn't follow what he wants from us.
Well, like Jimmy Swaggart, I mean, is this guy ever going to come clean?
You know, as long as he can make money off of it, why would he?
Fiction becomes a religion, places where nothing is clear. Sanity and reason just disappear.
Chairman, there are multiple members that could yield you time. I would ask that you...
I will have you physically removed from this meeting if you don't stop.
I've been searching for everything, anything, just a tiny shred of proof. Are you looking for miracles? I'm just looking for the truth. I'm just looking for the truth.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walton. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice President, Senator. It's good to have you before the committee. I wanted to just note that, Mr. Vice President, your reference to 30 cents a day comes from an EPA study, I believe. Unfortunately, that EPA study also assumes 150% growth in nuclear power in order to achieve that 30 cents a day, and that nuclear part is not in this bill.
The statistic I think is the most meaningful is that it really hasn't warmed, and in fact it's cooled a little bit since about 2001. Temperatures have been relatively stable since 2001. Then in 2007, 2008, we saw a pretty dramatic cooling, and only time will tell whether that continues on to the future or not.
I wonder if Al Gore travels this way.
If you want to look at temperature, the only way that I would trust the measurements is to look at satellites. Because satellites measure the temperature globally, from pole to pole, every day, with the same instrument, and it's transparent and open. It's all published.
Roy Spencer and I put together some satellite data that would tell us the global temperature. And the result was kind of interesting because we didn't see a whole lot of warming in the planet.
Climate crisis, climate crisis, climate crisis.
For the last 10 years or so, the temperature trends have flattened out, and there's some signs that it's starting to cool off. In fact, there are some papers that suggest it's going to cool off for another 10 or 15 years.
The satellite measurements are the only ones that are of any use. And they show, without doubt, that 98 was the warmest year, and since then temperatures have been lower and are tending downward.
We've just watched a financial meltdown in this country, the likes of which hasn't been seen in some time. Now, if people like credit default swaps, they're really going to like the carbon swaps.
There were warnings that the credit default swaps and the subprime mortgages and the other activities that caused the financial crisis were going to bring us ruin if we didn't address them, and nothing was done about it. If I could finish my answer. There are warnings now of a far worse catastrophe, and they're coming from a unified IPCC representing the global scientific community, and if nothing were to be done about it, the results would be far worse. We now have several $1 trillion of subprime carbon assets whose value is based on an assumption that it's perfectly okay to put 70 million tons of that pollution up there every 24 hours. So the reason, in answer to your first question, is why can't we ignore it? Because it's the biggest crisis we've ever faced.
And no one who's come before this committee from a scientific basis can show us the smoking gun that mankind is causing this to happen. You can create relationships between the number of sunspots and the partisan makeup of the Senate. Anything can be proven if you're willing to take the time to have the numbers.
There's only one issue. What is the cause? Is it natural or is it man-made? If it's natural, there's nothing we can do about it. You can forget about everything else. If it's man-made, you still have to show that warming is bad. That's difficult because warming is good. And you have to show that carbon dioxide is bad. That's very difficult because carbon dioxide is good.
This is the real pollution we need to be concerned about, smog. It contains all sorts of nasty things like ground-level ozone and sulfur dioxide. What it does not contain is CO2. But Gore and others have managed to trick the public into believing that CO2 is smog. It's not. To make it sound sinister, they've shortened carbon dioxide to just carbon to make it sound bad.
Carbon polluters themselves, subprime carbon assets. These carbon polluters...
CO2 is what plants need to live and thrive.
I disagree with the Supreme Court decision that CO2, they said CO2 was a pollutant. I don't see that at all. I see CO2 as plant food. A very remarkable benefit to the climate system that we are actually putting back into the climate system, something that was there to begin with that fertilized the earth.
Don't be afraid. We're doing a documentary on global warming. Can we chat with you for just a second? Serious? I'm serious. So we're talking about global warming. Do you believe in global warming?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Yes, I do.
Do you believe in global warming?
Yes.
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 I'm sorry. Good luck now.
Thank you. We're doing a documentary on global warming, and I know you're trying to ignore me, but you know you want to be in it, don't you?
I don't know anything about global warming.
Well, you don't have to. That's the beauty of this documentary. You don't have to know anything.
I know.
You sure? Okay.
It's easy to say we want to reduce CO2, but CO2 is the end process of using fuel, fossil fuels. It's not a side product. It's actually what you want. You want a perfectly combust fuel, all you'll get is CO2 out.
Do you believe in global warming?
Yes, I do.
And why?
Why? Because
I ask the hardest questions, don't I?
The environmental advocacy groups know how to touch their membership and what turns them on, and to anything industrial generally is a bad thing. And so by equating what comes out of a smokestack with carbon dioxide is a clever way to make it appear that CO2 is dangerous, bad, dirty, ugly, causes respiratory illnesses and so on, when in fact CO2 doesn't do any of those.
Based on an assumption that it's perfectly okay to put 70 million tons of that pollution up there.
Yeah, I have a problem with the term pollutant because all life on Earth has byproducts. You know, we have to alter our environment in order to survive, in order to thrive. And so do other forms of life. For instance, the existence of trees on the Earth changes the climate system compared to if there were no trees. The existence of trees steals all the sunlight, so other forms of life, you know, whether it's shrubs or who knows what on the ground, can't live. You know, they're crowded out. Why is it that trees have the right to change things on the planet, but the existence of people doesn't have the right, you know, to change things? It doesn't make sense.
I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in California, where the smog was bad enough that some days you couldn't see a street sign from halfway down the block.
Wow.
And that's real pollution. Ozone, particulate matter, smog. That's the what they used to call photochemical smog, the stuff that's brown, that's a giant haze. Those things are toxic to the human body. They harm the lungs at high concentrations. Now, fortunately, we've gotten those down a lot in this country, but the greenhouse gases are a whole different thing. The environmentalists are now changing their language. They're now calling them climate change pollution, to try to latch onto the word pollution and associate it with harm.
Right, they're trying to meld these.
They're trying to meld them because they want to confuse people about the nature of greenhouse gases. The greenhouse gases, you could breathe at many, many times their current concentration and not have any health problems.
The typical thing you see coming out of a smokestack that you see is actually water vapor, completely harmless water vapor.
You think it's humans that's doing all this as far as global warming?
Yeah, I do believe humans have a role to play, but I also hear that livestock also produce a lot of CO2.
Tell me what you think about carbon dioxide then.
In terms of a solution, like
What is it? Is it good or bad, or?
I mean, it's a pollutant.
That's ridiculous. CO2 is not a pollutant.
It's just not classified as a pollutant, but
Well, the EPA just did yesterday.
Are you serious?
The EPA said that carbon dioxide is a pollutant.
Good deal.
And it isn't. It's almost a religious belief that everything that mankind does is going to hurt the environment.
Are you doing anything to lessen your carbon footprint?
Yeah, I'm actually, I helped with a grant in the cafeteria to get reusable diningware and a new
Reusable diningware. Okay.
Yeah, so that has nothing to do with global warming.
So you think it's anything that we're doing that's causing the fluctuation in temperature?
As long as we stay here, we're constantly doing something to cause it.
Humans.
Humans. And doing what?
Everything that we do, cameras and
These,
though, global warming, cars.
Sorry. I guess we got to shut down this production because cameras are causing global warming now.
But does that mean that everything we do hurts the environment?
So what else do you do to be green?
To be green. In my house, I compost, both indoor and outdoor composting.
You got an indoor compost?
Yeah.
What's that smell like?
Happy with it. Actually, if it works correctly, there's no smell.
Really? Is it working correctly?
No.
Oh, apparently there's a smell.
Yeah.
And that's why the parents aren't happy.
Parents aren't happy. There were worms in it, and because it wasn't balanced, they escaped, so there was that problem.
There's hundreds of published studies that show how much better vegetation grows with more CO2 in the atmosphere.
Now, did you know that you emit carbon dioxide?
I do emit carbon dioxide.
Ooh, I know. Every time you breathe, it's carbon dioxide.
Yes.
So do you think that it's something that is natural that we emit, like that is naturally a bad thing?
Plants need carbon dioxide. They want more carbon dioxide. They're starved for carbon dioxide. They do best if you double or triple the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We know that from experiments in greenhouses.
Large greenhouses run the CO2 concentration in their air by a factor of 2 or 3 above what's in the atmosphere.
They're saying that CO2 is responsible, so if we could get rid of all the CO2...
Obviously, it would be a good thing.
No, without CO2, there would be no life on Earth. You know, I've heard environmentalists say that there's no safe level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. There would literally be no life on Earth. And I've heard green scientists say that.
How much CO2 is in the atmosphere? So how much CO2 is in the atmosphere, do you know?
I have no idea.
You want to take a guess?
No.
Well, go ahead and guess.
5%. Maybe 4%, 10%.
20%? That's what
majority, a vast majority, I believe.
0.039%.
Okay, so that's, gotcha. It's not as much as I thought.
You were close. You missed it by that much. Well, I appreciate you talking with us.
My pleasure, I think.
Oh, it'll be great.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Without CO2, which is a non-toxic, natural gas in the atmosphere, without CO2, life would come to an end. This would be a dead planet.
I think we need to consider the possibility that more CO2 should be a worthy goal rather than something that should be taxed.
Our legislation will price carbon to reflect its real costs to our economy and our society.
A large part of Al Gore's movie was based on the now debunked hockey stick graph.
Okay, the hockey stick is a graph that Michael Mann created in the late 1990s, and it purports to show average global temperature changes over the last 1,000 years. And the way Michael Mann draws those changes, for the first 900 years, temperatures are pretty flat. And then all of a sudden in the 20th century, the temperatures shoot up. And so the whole graph looks like a hockey stick, and the idea is, and the implication there is that humans cause that spike up. And isn't this a terrible thing, because it's just going to keep going up, and my God, the whole world's going to melt down.
It goes, it's going like this, and then boom.
Well,
how
that's
does he
turned out to
explain
be
that?
a complete fraud. A complete fraud. And even the IPCC no longer uses it.
We have the data that was used to create that hockey stick, all fictitious. It's all been debunked.
So when they say it's the warmest decade, they say in 160 years.
Ooh, wow. So, that's really
That's what they say. In
well,
small
that's a
print,
blip,
in
though.
small print.
But that's a blip, though, isn't it? That means nothing.
It's a blip, yes.
The hockey stick has been debunked as junk science. A lot of the early temperature readings, from 1,000 years ago or from 500 years ago, were based on estimates of global temperature from tree rings, which is just crazy. And then Michael Mann mixed those tree rings with temperature readings, and the whole thing is just a mess.
But tree rings are funny. They're very good for dating because you can count them. You can count back.
Right.
But they're not very good for temperature because it depends on whether they got enough moisture, whether there was clouds in the sky. Besides, the trees only grow in the summer.
Sounds like a tree ring circus to me, doesn't it to you?
I'll stop at that point.
What makes Michael Mann's hockey stick so incredibly inaccurate is he completely ignores the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age. The medieval warm period began around 900 AD, depending on which scientist you talk to, and lasted until about 1300 or 1350 AD. Around 1000 AD, the Vikings took advantage of the ice-free seas to colonize Greenland. You see, Greenland wasn't named that as a joke. The southern part of Greenland was quite green, and the Vikings prospered. This graph of ice core temperature and accumulation data comes from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Paleoclimatology Program. It shows that temperatures were considerably warmer in Greenland thousands of years ago than they are today. As far as the scientific community, is there a consensus that there was a medieval warm period and that there was a Little Ice Age?
Of course. The evidence is clear. First of all, there's geological evidence from measurements, and then the historical evidence. We have books, papers describing what things were like 1,000 years ago. Harvests were good when the climate was warm, and harvests got bad. People starved when the climate turned cold. There's no question about that. It's all documented.
Now, the global warming alarmists have tried to eliminate the medieval warm period. Dr. David Deming, a noted geologist and geophysicist, did some groundbreaking work with boreholes. He found these boreholes in the ground could yield estimates of historical temperature. His work was published in the magazine Science, which prompted a revealing email, he says, from a major person working in the area of climate change. This person thought Dr. Deming was one of them. He wrote in the email to Deming, quote, "We have to get rid of the medieval warm period." A group of scientists from the University of Michigan completed an exhaustive study using boreholes, over 6,000 boreholes from every continent on Earth. And they learned that the medieval warm period was not local or regional, it was global. Their graph shows how it was considerably warmer during the medieval warm period all over the globe than it is now.
But what's interesting is that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, thinks now that there are no long-term climate cycles anymore. For instance, the medieval warm period or the Little Ice Age. They've tried to actually expunge those out of the historic record of what's happened in climate and even in the history of mankind. You know, these are things that the IPCC has to get rid of if they are going to convince the public that mankind is now in charge of climate, that we're the ones that cause climate change and not Mother Nature, because they don't know how to explain them. And also, if nature can do that, can cause global warming and global cooling, you know, then that detracts from their case that it's mankind.
What if there were evidence out there that told you that we were not warming, but we were actually cooling? What would you think about that?
Well, I think that'll be good, because I love the cool weather.
To me, the existence of natural climate variability, which even the public understands exists, is an inconvenient truth for the United Nations and the IPCC, because it does exist no matter how badly they want it to not exist.
So you're open to having your mind changed about global warming?
Well, would that be a part of global warming? It being, you know, beginning to get a little cooler?
It'd be a part of global warming, only cooler. But in the past, in the medieval warm period, humans were fine, weren't they? I mean, we had no problem living in the medieval.
Humans were in great shape. That's when they built all the cathedrals. They had extra money. They were doing well. It's during the Little Ice Age when they starved and died. And that's all documented. You know, we have historic records.
The ClimateGate scandal exposed global warming as a myth cooked up by alarmists. Now a new book investigates just how they are and how communist corporations, elitist politicians, and reckless scientists have contributed to creating a phony crisis.
The ClimateGate scandal consisted of thousands of emails from some of the leading scientists involved in the global warming scare, who, according to an Associated Press review, stonewalled skeptics and discussed hiding data.
Michael Mann is part of the ClimateGate emails. In there are emails about how he's trying to hide the decline in temperatures that's been going on for the last 10, 15 years.
The surface measurements, as we're beginning to find out from ClimateGate, are manufactured and massaged.
One, these are supposed to be independent scientists who are looking for the truth, not for a political agenda.
They fiddled with the data every way they could.
And they shouldn't be trying to dodge Freedom of Information Act requests.
Now that ClimateGate has been upon us, and we know how they massage the data, we can say with some confidence that the IPCC is a hoax.
They shouldn't be engaging in what appears to be conspiratorial action to shut other scientists out of the process.
They survive on grants, and they mostly come from liberal organizations, the Heinz Foundation. There's a lot of discussion about James Hansen. Remember James Hansen? He's been on, I've been on a couple of times with him. They neglect to say that James Hansen was a recipient of very large amounts of money from the Heinz Foundation.
No, industry does not support any of my research. Mine are all federal and state grants.
And that's where they accuse some people of taking money from big oil and things like this, but you don't take that.
Well, environmentalists have a terrible time trying to figure out why the publications we produce don't support a global warming alarmist agenda, and so they have to come up with some evil reason for that. And they think we're funded by these industries, but in truth, we're just trying to find out what the right numbers are.
Well, the most thorough answer to the climate alarmists is a report prepared by a group of about 30 scientists. The full report is at least as thick as the IPCC report. It's 880 pages, and it has an appendix that lists the names of 31,000 scientists and engineers who disagree with the IPCC.
There is a consensus on the science.
31,000 scientists and engineers who disagree with the IPCC.
Is the guy not going to come talk to me?
Yes, this is Arlen Specter. Could Al come out and play? Maybe talk a little bit about global warming?
Do you believe in global warming?
Well, must be. Look at the weather now.
Yeah, well, one thing we do find in these surveys is that the public is all for saving the Earth from global warming. as long as it doesn't cost them too much, you know.
Would you be willing to have your taxes raised for it or pay extra fees for it?
Well, it depends, really.
Depends on how much, huh?
Yeah, huh?
Many billions of dollars have been spent.
All right, let me make you an offer, $100 a month.
Ouch.
So there's all kinds of money that has been spent on this whole global warming issue already.
$75 a month.
That's still a bit.
50 is my final offer.
That's too much.
That's too much?
Uh-huh.
Back during Kyoto, many years ago, when this thing first started, we asked the question, what would it cost if we were to comply with the emission requirements? The range it would cost America would be somewhere between $300 and $330 billion a year. And I want everyone out there to realize that that was 10 times the largest tax increase in 4 decades.
I worry about our future as a country economically, the jobs that will be lost, millions of jobs. Millions of jobs will be lost. Energy prices will go up, and all that just gets shifted over to countries that are industrializing now that don't have near the pollution controls we do. So if you're on the West Coast, you're just going to get the pollution from China coming over the top on the jet stream and landing right in your lap while you're waiting for your unemployment check.
But then you have companies, like Apple and Nike. They're proud of how green they are, and they've left recently. They've quit the U.S. Chamber of Commerce because the Chamber of Commerce has opposed cap and trade. Well, if these companies were really serious about doing something for the environment, they'd leave China, because while all the slave labor is manufacturing all their goods over there, they're emitting pollution that there are no controls for. So if environmentalists really wanted to accomplish something for the environment, they would go to China and make China pass the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act, or some sort of environmental law, because right now it's just chaos.
If we shift our jobs there, and they're using these factories that have none of these pollution controls, or very few, and then we just buy the products back, tell me how that helps.
I represent a very low-income district in eastern North Carolina.
Last year, we lost wind manufacturing jobs despite all the subsidies, because in China, your average wind worker earns $4,000 a year.
I'm obviously concerned about the cost of this legislation and what it will do to low-income families, not just for electricity.
What company in their right mind is going to make wind turbines in America paying a worker $60,000, $70,000 when you can make them in China for $4,000?
And so my question to you is Mr. Gore, what do I tell a single parent, for example, in my district with 2 young children making $8 an hour? What can I say to reassure her that she will be able to afford the cost of this legislation?
There's a reason they rush these things through. They don't want the press to know what's in it. They don't want the people to find out what's in it. There's a reason you get amendments at 3 a.m.
This is Barney Frank. I'm here to see Al Gore. We'll talk about global warming.
The way to address this problem is to put our efforts behind identifying a reliable replacement for fossil fuels, and you've not identified it so far, and any transition that you think you're going to make is going to be so heavily subsidized that you're going to bankrupt this country on this notion of cap and trade. I am all for efficiencies. We have air problems in California, renewable energies, things that keep the air clean out there. But unless you come up with a replacement to fossil fuels, you're not going to be able to make that transition. And I think that aside from the sky is falling, we're going to be dead in 30 years, and the planet's going to burn up, I think the reasonable approach to this problem is innovation, efficiency, a robust economy, which you will destroy with cap and trade.
Would you believe this is Jesse Jackson here to see Al Gore? Could you ring man, please?
We talk about carbon polluters. You talk about them. It's my understanding that back in 1997, when you were vice president, Enron's CEO, Ken Lay, was involved in discussions with you at the White House about helping develop this type of policy, this trading scheme. Is that accurate? Is it inaccurate? It's been reported.
I don't know, but I met with Ken Lay, as lots of people did, before anybody knew that he was a
right.
crook.
And clearly, you can see why so many of us are concerned about this type of cap and trade energy tax that would be literally turning over this country's energy economy.
I didn't know him well enough to call him Kenny Boy.
Well, but you knew him well enough to help devise this trading scheme, and obviously we know what Enron and these big guys on Wall Street like Goldman Sachs, and I know you've got interest with Goldman Sachs.
No.
These people, well, that's been reported. Is that not accurate?
No, I wish I did.
With executives you're partnered in companies with executives from Goldman Sachs. Well, if you're not. Either way, Enron clearly had an interest in doing this when they were around. We saw what they did. And when you see the types of people involved in wanting to set up this kind of scheme, you can see why so many of us are concerned about turning our energy economy over to a scheme that was devised by companies like Enron and some of these Wall Street firms that have wrecked our financial economy.
I don't really know if you want me to respond to that. I guess what you're trying to say, you're trying to...
I mean, clearly there will be big winners and big losers.
You're trying to say there's some kind of guilt by association?
And I'm saying that there are going to be big winners and big losers in this bill. But some of the big winners are some of the very financial experts that help destroy our financial marketplace.
Higher gasoline prices, maybe 75 cents a dollar a gallon. Higher electricity prices, 18% in part of my district's the estimate. How does that solve the problem? It doesn't. It redistributes wealth.
You can give them these facts, and it doesn't change their mind. And that's how I know that they're morally bankrupt.
The American people have had enough.
The federal government taking over the economy, that's really what cap and trade's all about.
And you people, the ones standing in front of me right now, are the only ones who can stop it. Are you going to? Thank you.
How are you? Thanks for all your hard work.
Oh, thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Phil Valentine. Thank you. Cap and trade. Cap and trade. We need to cap and trade every congressman who voted for this thing.
How does it feel when you know we're watching? How does it feel when you live in fear? The weapon of words may not be too frightening, but we're just the tip of the spear.
Bigger government is what we need. We need to manage what we have.
We're just the tip of the spear.
You keep spending, you have to keep raising taxes. That helps nobody.
We're just the tip of the spear.
How you doing? We're doing a documentary on global warming. Wanted to get an interview with Al. We understand he's in town.
No, he's not in town. That I can assure you.
He's not? He's doing. How you doing? Phil Valentine. Good to see you.
Oh, good to see you, Mr. Valentine. Why don't you give our press communications director a call? Her name is Kelly Kreider.
Okay.
And she will be more than happy to help you. Okay.
All right. Is Al at one of his other houses, or?
He doesn't have any other houses.
He doesn't have 3 more houses?
No.
He's got one in Virginia, doesn't he?
No.
Place in San Francisco?
No.
And where was the other place? Oh, the Carthage place. He doesn't still own that?
That's his father's.
Okay.
Yeah, that's his father's place.
He's not on the houseboat, is he?
You're very...
I mean, you got to ask these. Inquiring minds want to know.
I know.
Well, according to news reports and court records, Gore does indeed own multiple homes. He owns a home in Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. He owns 2 properties in California, a condo overlooking San Francisco Bay, and an ocean view villa in Montecito. Then there's the house and farm in Carthage, Tennessee. It's not his father's, by the way. His parents have been deceased for some time, and Gore was the sole heir. Then, of course, there's his mansion in Nashville.
I think it's pretty hypocritical.
Do you?
Yes.
Oh, and the humongous houseboat he keeps on a lake in Tennessee. He calls it BioSolar 1, BS1. How appropriate. This guy has the carbon footprint of Sasquatch. He claims the houseboat runs on biodiesel, but locals tell us there's not a single biodiesel outlet anywhere on the lake. Maybe I can make him up a batch of biodiesel at my farm. Does it bother you that he doesn't live a life like we do, that he has like 4 houses and a houseboat and that kind of stuff?
Well, it depends on what kind of houses they are.
Well, after our failure to get an interview at Gore's house, we contacted his press person, Kelly Kreider, via email. She responded by telling us, "Unfortunately, Al is not conducting any interviews at this time, so I am unable to book anything for your documentary." Now, I knew he had a book coming out, so he was bound to be doing some interviews, and he was. KQED in California, public radio, by the way, the New Yorker magazine, the Guardian newspaper, the CBC in Canada, the Letterman Show, the BBC, CBS, Slate.com. Apparently, Gore was talking to everybody but me. Well, I thought it only fair that he get a chance to respond to all this information we'd unearthed, so we attended one of his book signings. Now, I wasn't there to disrupt the event. I just wanted an interview.
And ask, how did you find the warm courage?
Thank you very much.
So I simply melted into the woodwork, being the wallflower that I am. Well, it was only a matter of time before I was spotted. The leering has begun. She's telling her now that Phil Valentine's here. So the big guy with security is now alerted.
Hey guys, you're gonna have to get off.
Rules. They have so many rules, these liberals, you know?
Okay, here you go. Did you have one? Ma'am? Ma'am, did you have one? There you go. You're all set. You're welcome. There you go.
Watch this. Watch this. Since they were blocking our shots, I thought I'd go around them. Well, actually, over them. I was starting to get a little nervous because that huge security guy was staring at me. Then he called me over. Is it a trap? Is he going to throw me to the ground, put the cuffs on me?
I'm supposed to be scolding you or keeping an eye on you. Are you guys going to be here tonight?
I was just going to see if we could talk to him afterwards, if he's willing to talk to anybody.
I'd like to talk to you.
Okay, good. He said, act like I'm scolding you right now and telling you that you need to stay away from Mr. Gore. He's actually an FOP, which is a friend of Phil, so he's one of us. We have our moles on the inside everywhere. It's amazing. Even next to Al Gore. FOPs, that's our super secret organization that meets monthly in Dick Cheney's underground lair. Well, not really. FOPs are Friends of Phil. It's the email list for our radio show. Now, this guy was not with us, and he and his friends apparently did come to disrupt the event.
Al Gore, you're a traitor. Your carbon tax is meant to enslave America. We know it.
We don't want your global governance.
We don't want your global governance.
They had
we don't want your
one for
carbon
me.
tax. You're a traitor.
And here we are standing right next to him.
Why can't you debate more nonsense?
They'll never believe I had nothing to do with it.
We treat each other with respect. Yeah, let's treat each other with respect and actually debate. Actually have a debate.
Let's treat each other civilly and politely because that's part of us having a decent America.
And replying to someone's question would also.
Well, you saw how the rules went.
I had nothing to do with it. In all the confusion, Al Gore vanished. Al's gone?
Yeah, he's still playing his Ghost Recon.
Where'd he go?
I'm Kaylee.
Hey, Kaylee.
How you
Why
doing?
didn't you want to talk to us about it?
It's not that you want to talk to. It's really, I don't know if you know, but we actually get thousands of requests for interviews. He does do his best to try to talk to everybody, but we cannot say yes to everybody, unfortunately. So I just wanted to let you know.
Why were y'all trying to block our shots when we were trying to get shots?
We were actually just trying to get books signed. I don't know if you saw the line, but we were trying to get as many books signed as we could.
Yeah, but every time our camera came up, then somebody would stand like this.
Actually,
and
I
somebody
think
would.
we got a lot of good footage. I think you guys got a lot of good footage. So,
what's the chance of him getting an interview? Of getting an interview with him?
I don't know the answer to that right now. He's in the middle of a book tour. He's fully booked through the end of November.
Okay.
But I think y'all got plenty of good footage, actually, don't you?
Yeah, but we didn't get an interview though. We came for. Okay. No interview here. No interview in the house. No interview anywhere. So we'll keep trying. Huh? I don't know. He's slippery, isn't he? Very slippery. I mean, when we turned around, he was gone. It's almost like magic, isn't it? Black magic.
he's trying to help overall. He's trying to help global
Well, let me ask you.
warming.
This is the American way. Do you think all these rich Republicans don't make money? Oh, Viva, whatever your names are. I don't watch
let me ask you this. He's trying to
help.
Now, I've done this long enough to know that there are some folks you can reason with.
God bless him. God bless him. God bless him.
And there's some folks who are just unreasonable.
God bless him for having money. Everybody has money.
he's
That's
not
what
living
everybody
the life that
can
But he's
have.
invested, that stepped up to the plate, and
You're
he's
accusing him of stealing?
Oh, well, they came up talking to me.
No, just I mean, anyone other that's trying to do something. Thank you. And I'm not picking on him, and I wouldn't call something out to him. That was my problem with that gentleman. It's like, let him sign his book.
Well, we didn't either.
Let him sign his book.
We stood there waiting until we get through, and then we'll go check it.
He's trying, Who else?
I don't know that he's trying.
Okay, give me a Republican that's doing something about global warming. That's what I'm saying.
See, global warming is a farce. That's why the Republicans aren't doing anything about it, because it's not existed. It's not existed.
Really? Have you gone to Alaska lately?
I was just up there 2 weeks ago.
And you didn't see anything?
I saw it was cold as hell up there. That's what I saw. When I looked,
if he did not have if he had one house and one vehicle, you probably wouldn't be coming against him as much as you are now. The fact is,
absolutely. Yeah, I think if he were living the life,
right.
I would never go to Ed Begley Jr. and try to ask him these questions because he's living the life.
Okay.
If Al Gore were living the life, then I would say, hey, more power to you.
He's been approached on that issue, and I
He never has an answer.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer
And
is.
we've been trying to get with him for a couple of months, but he won't talk with us. But good talking with you. We got to run.
Talking to you. All right.
See you later. Now, see, that's the way you get along with liberals. That lady back inside with the Gore 2008 button on, she'd be so proud of me.
That's part of us having a decent America.
He's avoiding the confrontation of the truth. He's avoiding the hard questions. He wants to talk to people who will pitch him the softballs, but he doesn't want to talk to anybody who wants to talk seriously about the issue of global warming. So,
Okay, sure, y'all come, you can't be criminal longer, okay? I'm sorry, it's just wrong policy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do it. You need to stop, okay? Please.
here at the mall, there will be no filming when Mr. Gore comes out. Is that perfectly clear?
Give me the bullet, Barney.
Almost half of the ice in the Arctic cap has already melted during the last 20 years.
Another inconsistent truth is this notion that the world's polar ice caps are melting due to man-made global warming. This is one issue that tends to really scare millions of people around the globe. Once again, the global warming alarmists aren't telling the whole story. The head guy with Greenpeace said that by 2030 that there was going to be no sea ice in the summer of 2030. He's now recanted that to some degree, but says that it wasn't really a mistake, that he has to emotionalize the issue in order to get people to pay attention.
Well, I hear things like that, emotionalizing an issue, and really, as a scientist, just cringe at notions like that. That's when you make bad decisions, is when you emotionalize issues. And so the hard data does show the Arctic sea ice has shrunk quite a bit in the last few decades. I want people to realize that Arctic ice is floating already, so its melt does not change the sea level at all. But that doesn't take into account also what's happening at the other pole, the South Pole, where sea ice has actually increased. So that when you add the two together, you come up pretty much right at average.
But what they show us on television when we see the calving of these glaciers, and they attribute that to melting, and actually that is the glacier moving and getting bigger, is it not? And it calves off the end of it.
When there's more pressure on top, as the snow accumulates, it pushes the glacier out into the ocean slowly, and the edges break off, and that's called calving. And it's very spectacular. It makes a lot of noise, and you see all that ice splashing in the ocean.
Yes, the sea ice in the Arctic, the sea ice cover has decreased in the last 30 years that we've had satellite measurements to be able to monitor the sea ice. We really don't have good measurements before about 1979. Now what's interesting is if you go back into newspaper reports from the 20s and 30s, same thing was happening back then. Temperatures were nearly as warm back in the 20s and 30s in the Arctic as they have been lately. Some of us think that all of this is just part of a natural cycle. a cycle called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation.
The Pacific Decadal Oscillation, that's what periodically causes the Arctic ice to disappear for long periods of time. In my book, Climate Gate, I've got a snapshot of a submarine. It's the USS Skate. It's from 1957. It's floating like a cork in an iceless sea, which is the North Pole in 1957 in March, just after the winter. Absolutely no ice whatsoever. That was in the 50s.
Mother Nature can cause climate change all by herself just by opening or closing the sunshade a little bit. And the sunshade is global cloudiness. And if that changes cloud cover by only 1%, you automatically have global warming or global cooling for decades.
When you look at the Arctic tundra, you see this flat, treeless plain. It was so warm several thousand years ago that forest grew all the way to the edge of the Arctic Ocean, and in many places. So the notion that this barren, cold land has always been like that is just wrong. It has been much warmer in the past than today.
I mean, volcanoes blew up on this continent for millions of years.
Right.
You know, it's emitted all kinds of toxic gas. This planet has been through some serious natural causes.
Right. I always thought it was the Flintstones driving SUVs.
Betty and Wilma. Now, they used their feet.
That's right, they did. Boy, they were green before green was cool, weren't they?
The Greenstones. Absolutely.
Much has been made about the polar bears and the alleged effect global warming has had on them. Dr. Mitch Taylor has spent decades studying polar bears. In the Davis Strait area alone, he says the polar bear population has grown from around 850 in the mid-1980s to over 2,100 today. His findings back what Inuit hunters have been saying for years. Dr. Taylor was all set to present his findings at a meeting of the Polar Bear Specialist Group in Copenhagen, but was told to stay away. The chairman of the group didn't dispute Dr. Taylor's research. Instead, he was told, quote, "It was the position you've taken on global warming that brought opposition. There are 19 different polar bear populations and all but 2 are increasing in number. The 2 that are slightly declining are doing so because of local reasons, not global warming."
A judge in the British High Court.
Filmmaker Philip McAleer managed a rare penetration of the steel wall surrounding Gore that keeps the truth at bay. McAleer took the opportunity to confront Gore on the British High Court ruling that found multiple errors in Gore's movie and requires schools to alert students before showing the movie about those major errors, including Gore's claim that global warming is killing off polar bears.
One of them, for example, was that polar bears, if I remember correctly, it's been a long time ago, that polar bears really aren't endangered. Well, polar bears didn't get that word. So,
well, the number of polar bears have increased, actually, and are increasing.
You don't think they're endangered, do you?
The number of polar bears have increased.
Do you think they're endangered?
The number of polar bears have increased. I mean,
all right,
if the number of polar bears increase, surely they're not endangered.
Put the word polar
a judge did have a lengthy hearing.
We have to move on.
No, but no, I mean...
Gore managed to stall long enough to give his minions time to shut McAleer down.
Doing a debate here.
No, this question, he hasn't answered the question. Vice
We have
President Gore
10
hasn't
minutes
answered.
left for these
yes,
people
but I would
to ask
appreciate
questions.
his answer to the court.
Ultimately cutting his microphone off.
The reaction of the journalists, the actions of Andrew Revkin of the New York Times, and the action of the journalists was to shut down the journalists and protect the politician.
It still didn't change the fact that the polar bears are not only not dying off, they're thriving.
They're fine, they're growing, they're doing well. They survived the medieval warming, which was much warmer than today.
About 4 degrees warmer, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they survived nicely, and they're still willing to eat people if they can catch a hold of them. Polar bears eat little seal pups.
Yes, they do. They're mean.
They're cute little seal pups,
That's
yes. They eat them for breakfast.
Isn't that something?
Yes.
See, we should be doing something about we're not even worried about the seal pups.
Well, Greenpeace used to be worried about seal pups.
Right.
Now they worry about polar bears.
Right.
I suppose eventually they'll get back to worrying about seal pups.
Well, they ought to be worried about man. I mean,
exactly. They should worry about people.
A number of new studies continue to show that climate change is increasing the intensity of hurricanes.
This has been a controversial claim from the beginning, but as the data sets that go back to 1850 on hurricanes become much more solid and carefully done, we find there's no trend at all in hurricanes, either in intensity or number. And so this one, I hope, was put to bed a few years ago, but it still crops up every once in a while, but the evidence just keeps piling up that hurricanes are not increasing in severity or in frequency.
It's not enough that the global warmers want to fret over some fantasy link between global warming and hurricanes. Some with money are trying to actually stop hurricanes. Billionaire Bill Gates has applied for patents for machines that would either slow down or stop hurricanes. The unintended consequences could be disastrous.
In 2005, in the fall of that year, North Alabama received 93% of its rainfall from 2 hurricanes that had hit the Gulf Coast. Without that rainfall, we would have had a very serious drought situation. Hurricanes are part of the real world system, so if you want to tinker with hurricanes, you have tremendous downstream consequences that include river discharge, water for vast areas of the southeastern United States. There could be a problem at the Gulf Coast, but that's the risk you take when you build something on the Gulf Coast. A hurricane eventually will come.
If you really want to know what's in someone's head, look at their rear. No, not that rear. The rear of their car. With conservatives, you might find the occasional vintage McCain sticker, maybe a sticker from their favorite beach resort. With liberals, it's an Obama sticker or one of those annoying coexist stickers. But the dirt people have stickers plastered all over their cars. Every night I clean a couple of smart cars off my grill. Then there are those Igbot people. I'm not sure what side they're on. Of course, if you get close enough to some of these dirt people, it's a good thing we don't live downwind. Don't you worry about dirt people. Wind them up and just watch them wind. Dirt people. I'm just about to lose my mind. And I don't care about being sustainable, to touched and debridable masses are going hysterical. The atmospherical gases are just fine. Can we chat with you for a couple of minutes?
I'm actually in a hurry. Sorry.
You're in a hurry? Everybody's in a hurry. We need to slow down. I mean, come on, the planet's not going to be here much longer. A huge mistake Al Gore made in his movie was his discussion of ice core data. He said the ice has stories to tell us, and indeed it does, just not the stories he was telling us in the movie. He made a big deal about this graph. It's from data collected from ice core samples from the Vostok project. The real evidence about what's really going on was right there for everyone to see, but Gore failed to point it out.
In the geologic record, going back to the last ice age, there it is quite clear that the temperature warms, and then a few hundred years later you'll see an increase in CO2.
Scientists studying this data now tell us the rise and fall in temperature comes before the rise or fall in CO2. In other words, as the Earth warms, the oceans emit more CO2. Al Gore got it backwards. Now that's what you might call an inconvenient truth.
So there's no question that it's the warming that's causing the increase in CO2. And where does it come from? From the ocean. The ocean gives up its CO2, its carbon dioxide, as it warms.
Why is it that everybody wants to ignore that big burning ball of fire in the sky? Why they want to look at man and SUVs and smokestacks and they ignore the sun? Why is that?
Well, people like to blame humans for everything. And besides, if it's the sun, then there's nothing you can do about it.
You know, something that is really causing a new and renewed interest in the sun is the fact right now it's very quiet. And we haven't really seen much of a temperature rise in the past 10 years, so you kind of connect a couple of dots there and you wonder maybe the sun has a much bigger role in this whole climate change. It certainly did in the past, and so it could be having that same effect right now.
In June of 2011, scientists made a startling discovery in what news outlets said might be the science story of the century. 3 different analyses of the sun's behavior from the U.S. National Solar Observatory and the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory indicated unusually low solar activity. It shows we may be going into another little ice age within the next decade or so. The next few generations of humanity might not find themselves trying to cope with global warming, but rather with a significant cooling. To paraphrase political guru James Carville, it's a sun, stupid.
We've only been measuring the climate for about 150 years with thermometers, and in the beginning of that period they were hand-painted glass thermometers that were placed wherever commerce was done. They weren't actually spread out to measure the entire Earth's climate. They were in cities which grew up around them, changing the balance of heat around them.
The ultimate evidence, supposedly, that we have a global warming problem coming are all of these computerized climate models, which have all kinds of tuning knobs on them, fudge factors, basically, to where you can get them to behave in any way you want.
Our real information, our real understanding about the climate is extremely limited.
We are one of the few places on the planet in which we actually build data sets from scratch so that we can test these various assertions. And the reason we're not viewed as global warming alarmists is that when we test these assertions, we find them generally to fail.
Back in 1969, future Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan was an advisor to Richard Nixon. He warned that the scientific consensus was CO2 content would rise 25% by the year 2000 and temperatures would rise 7 degrees. That, Moynihan claimed, could lead to a sea level rise of 10 feet, wiping out New York and Washington. Whoops. By 1975 and on into the 80s, the so-called consensus was CO2 emissions would bring on another ice age.
According to the 1500-year cycle, we should be warming for another 200 or 300 years, and then going back into a cooling phase.
Right. When you say warming, how warm do you think? Will it be as warm as the medieval warm period, as being about 3.5 degrees more than now?
I'm glad you asked me that. I have no idea. You know, I don't make any predictions about climate. Why? Because I know nothing about the sun. I don't know how it's going to behave, nor does anyone else.
Well, you know, you'd think that the recession would have taught people about projections and predictions of the future. The climate is a very complex system. It's in fact a chaotic system. And so the idea that with a simple computer model you're going to predict what's going to happen 100 years from now is absurd.
There's not enough evidence on the other side to warrant what they're saying. So what is their motivation?
Remember that there are loud advocates who are really not scientific communities, but are organizations that depend upon certain kinds of legal actions and policies in place to keep their views of the world alive. These are generally not populated by scientists.
I think for a number of people on the left, this is almost a theology.
Al Gore has admitted that global warming regulation is the road to global governance.
There is a belief that basically humans are bad for the planet. You start
We're a
there.
parasite.
Yeah, we're a virus on the planet and infecting the planet with something bad. So if you take that as your sort of your assumption to start with, then whatever humans do is bad.
For environmentalists, it's more about almost a religion. They want to minimize humanity's impact on the earth in every way possible.
Well, I think you can draw very good parallels between a religion where there is belief in core beliefs that can't be attacked by anything, and the global warming issue. There are core beliefs that no matter what the data might say, will not be changed in someone's mind.
It's a secular religion, and so they are prepared to do things that don't make sense at a rational level, but make a great deal of sense emotionally to them.
And there's a place for religion, there's a place for science. When we're talking about global warming, it's no place for religion. It's a place for science.
Whether you're a Baptist, a Buddhist, or a Baha'i, you should get the same answer.
We're on our knees as a nation, dependent on other countries for our energy because of what the federal government has done to us over the last several decades.
Well, the trouble is it almost seems like people need to have a belief, a worldview, a religious faith that we are hurting the environment by some mechanism that we can then fix.
The irrational environmental policy that has very little effect on our environment, but has a big effect on our quality of life, our prosperity as a nation.
You know, at the end of the Cold War, we threw these people out the window red, they walked back in the front door green. They use the environment as a shield behind which they advance their social and political agenda.
It's control. More and more, the people here in Washington believe that they can centrally manage and control economic activity.
I believe it's about control. They know that energy is what we call the master resource, and if they control energy, they control all of our economy.
Control is indeed at the root of the global warming movement. Many of these totalitarianists yearn to wield their control with an iron fist. The fanatics have moved from simply ridiculing those who don't see things their way to calling for deniers to be punished. Canadian environmentalist David Suzuki called for skeptical government leaders to be thrown in jail. Other environmentalists suggested denier gulags. George Monbiot wrote in his book Heat, quote, "We should have war crimes trials for these bastards, some sort of climate Nuremberg. And what would happen to these climate deniers after such a trial?" Well, the group 1010 Global had a few ideas when they produced this video, and I have to warn you beforehand, what you're about to see is quite disturbing.
Now, it's called 10-10. The idea is everyone starts cutting their carbon emissions by 10%, thus keeping the planet safe for everyone, eventually.
We're thinking of using our car less. I'm going to cycle to school.
That's fantastic, Jemima. Now, no pressure at all, but it'd be great to get a sense of how many of you might do this, just a rough percentage. That's fantastic. And those not? Philip and Tracy. That's fine, that's absolutely fine. Your own choice. Okay, class, thank you so much for today, and I will see you all tomorrow. Oh, just before you go, I just need to press this little button here. Now, everybody, please remember to read chapters 5 and 6 on volcanoes and glaciation. Except for Philip and Tracy, of course.
1010. Hundreds of thousands of people, schools, businesses, hospitals, movie stars, knitting circles, scout troops, presidents and governments, all tackling climate change in more than 40 countries. Care to join us? No pressure.
Hysteria and fanaticism have become the norm in the global warming movement. Believe it or not, somebody actually did a study on the positive environmental impact of Genghis Khan killing off 40 million people. I guess Hitler would have gotten a Green Award had it not been for those polluting ovens. But the dirty little secret is population control has always been at the heart of the global warming movement. We're looking down our collective noses at these third world countries, but these people have a right to develop just like we had a right to develop. But we've got people now saying that for the sake of the planet, on some mythical, unfounded science, that we're going to keep these people in cyclical poverty for the rest of eternity. To me, that's the cruelest part of this whole thing, isn't it? I mean, that we're in the name of saving the planet and global warming, we're going to try to keep these people down.
I agree completely that we are not only depriving poor people in other countries of lifting themselves out of poverty with all of these different environmental restrictions on them, but we're even killing them. Poverty kills. We know that.
You have an adopted granddaughter from Africa.
Yeah.
Great story that you told me about her as far as the way you've nurtured this young lady, and she is going to be a wonderful contribution to society.
The little girl you referred to is a girl that we found 3 days old, and she has now been adopted by my daughter. We found her in Ethiopia. And by the way, she turns out she's a genius. She's reading at college level at age 8. Wow. But I've become very familiar, Phil, over the years with a lot of the third world, but certainly with Africa. The worst thing you could do to them is to take away what little electricity, what little energy that they have over there. They die. It's a life and death issue with them. They're concerned about surviving, not about some scientist who says that the world's going to come to an end if we don't stop CO2.
But we don't need to go as far as Africa to find devastation wreaked by environmental extremism. It's happening right here in America. An already dire water shortage in the San Joaquin Valley in California was made desperate by environmentalists determined to save a 2-inch long fish.
In the San Joaquin in water supply in California, it's due to 3 different lawsuits that have restricted water deliveries to agriculture for a delta smelt of worthless little worm in the delta that needs to go the way of the dinosaur. And they've shut pumps down and restricted water deliveries to California over that thing when what's eating it is a striped bass, which is a non-native species. There are 0 water deliveries to my farmers. It's costing 40 to 60,000 jobs this year and a $6 billion hit to our economy. That is not global warming. That is not global warming that's causing problems in our forests. It's the result of bad policy because of environmental alarmism. And I think that current debate over global warming and cap and trade is another result of environmental alarmism.
Destroying the old industries destroys the people who are opposed to you. And so they favor the kind of new age, modern, post-industrial stuff. The problem with that is that there's not enough of it for the country. And don't forget that for people like Gore, this has been a very effective opportunity to get your tax money to build his car company. I mean, Gore is a very substantial investor in many of these new technologies and stands to become much richer if he can get the government to rig the game in favor of the kind of technology that he's investing in.
Are we talking about, when you say his car company, we're talking about figuratively?
No, he's an investor in a car company which just got $478 million in loan guarantees from the federal government.
Well, I'll be dogged. Speaker Newt is exactly right. Well, not exactly right. Newt was a little off on the figures. Gore's car company isn't getting $478 million from the government. It's getting $529 million from the government. That little hybrid sports car, which is built in Finland, sells for $89,000. That's the way to help the little people with their carbon footprint.
And I've got an article from October 8th, New York Times Magazine, about a firm called Kleiner Perkins, a capital firm called Kleiner Perkins. Are you aware of that company?
Well, yes, I'm a partner at Kleiner Perkins.
So you're a partner in Kleiner Perkins. Okay. Now, they have invested about $1 billion in 40 companies that are going to benefit from cap and trade legislation. So is the legislation that we are discussing here today, is that something that you are going to personally benefit from?
I believe that the transition to a green economy is good for our economy and good for all of us. And I have invested in it, but every penny that I have made, I have put right into a nonprofit, the Alliance for Climate Protection, to spread awareness of why we have to take on this challenge. And Congresswoman, if you believe that the reason I have been working on this issue for 30 years is because of greed, you don't know
Sir,
me.
I'm not making accusations. I'm asking questions that have been asked of me. Are you willing to divest yourself of any profit? Does all of it go to a not-for-profit that is an educational not-for-profit?
Every penny that I have made has gone to it. Every penny, from the movie, from the book, from any investments in renewable energy. I've been willing to put my money where my mouth is.
That's a heck of a lot of money. That's a heck of a lot of mouth. Good thing Mr. Gore wasn't under oath or he'd still be in jail. Let's review. Gore said,
every penny that I have made, I have put right into a nonprofit, the Alliance for Climate Protection.
Well, every penny, unless you don't count the $35 million he coughed up for investments in hedge funds. Not bad for a guy who was worth less than $2 million when he left office. Oh, and the Alliance for Climate Protection? That's a nonprofit that spreads awareness about global warming. It's controlled by whom? Al Gore. The nonprofit side touts propaganda about man-made global warming, while the investment side invests in companies poised to take advantage of cap and trade and carbon offset schemes, as he testifies before Congress, urging them to pass the very legislation that'll make Gore and his partners even richer.
He set up a company so he can buy carbon offsets from himself, so that he can fly around the world making speeches and getting lots of money for it. It's a great idea. He's a better businessman than he was a vice president.
Gore's not the only one making a killing off global warming hysteria. His partner in Generation Investment Management is David Blood. Blood and Gore. Sounds like a nice combo, eh? Canadian businessman and international socialist Maurice Strong, and Dr. Rajendra Pachauri. He's chairman of the IPCC. What do all these men have in common, aside from peddling in global warming fear? They're all heavily invested in the Chicago Climate Exchange. This is where all this cap and trade will be traded. The founder of CCX, Richard Sandor, estimates that it has the potential of being a $10 trillion market. Oh, by the way, Dr. Pachauri's PhD is not in climate science. It's in economics. Makes sense now, doesn't it?
I've been willing to put my money where my mouth is.
And no, there's nothing wrong with making money, but there's something terribly wrong with Al Gore posing as a so-called expert witness on legislation that could make him filthy rich.
Hey, what'd you sell your soul for? How much will it bring? What pockets do you live in? How much cash is now your king? Remember when we mattered and you took that oath and swore you'd put this country first? Is that thought easy to ignore? Hey, what'd you sell your soul for?
Lest we be accused of not presenting the other side, let me make a couple of points. First, this movie is the other side. Second, we gave those on the other side plenty of chances to defend their position.
She's calling for me?
Oh, no.
Oh, she's calling for the door to shut. Okay.
We walked all through the halls of Congress begging to talk to somebody. Anybody.
I'm Phil Valentine.
Should I videotape it? I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay, I'm not either. Phil Valentine.
Are you videotaping that?
He's videotaping me, though.
Am I in the shot?
No. Democrats are very suspicious of cameras for some reason. I wonder why. I forget where we came in.
We dogged Gore's tracks for months trying to get an interview.
It's just amazing for somebody that is so passionate about something, believes something so strongly that they are so I would, if I was him, I would jump at every opportunity
to make my point.
You and your mom and your grandma and anybody, you know,
look like a fool
with
the facts.
Yeah. If I know what I know and I know it to be true,
then I would tell everybody.
To take every opportunity to tell everybody and answer any question.
When you add in the mix his constant, limousining and jetting around the world, I mean, the guy is a total hypocrite.
The 3,000 best scientists in the world.
That's ridiculous.
He really is the king of hypocrites.
By making energy more expensive, we are going to deny poor people around the world their chance to lift themselves out of poverty.
Man-made global warming pollution causes global warming.
Poverty kills.
31,000 scientists and engineers who disagree with the IPCC.
Over 1 billion people in the world still don't have electricity. Can you and I imagine what it would be like to live on a daily basis without electricity? It'd be impossible.
And so the idea that with a simple computer model you're going to predict what's going to happen 100 years from now is absurd.
IPCC is a hoax.
It almost seems like people need to have a belief, a worldview, that we are hurting the environment by some mechanism that we can then fix.
But this is what's happening with this cult of global warming, isn't it? People want to think that they're doing the right thing. People want to feel like they matter. And that's, in essence, what this is all about. This is basic human instinct, right? Guilt. Guilt. You are guilty of something. People have made more money off guilt than anything else. More than pity, more than fear. Fear is a close second, though. But guilt, you feel guilty. So if you've got guilt out there and people feel like that they are guilty for destroying the planet, but you give them away that they can erase that guilt. And the way to erase that guilt is to recycle some old milk jugs, right? Drive a Prius and then buy some carbon offsets. You're done. You're cool. You're good. You're part of the solution now.
And part of the in crowd.
And part of the in crowd, you're driving an ugly car and you're putting plastic out by the curb. You matter. And that's what it's all about, wanting to matter. And now these people matter. It's all window dressing. They're printing books on recycled paper. That's Al Gore's latest thing. Al, you invented the internet, dude. Why not just put it up on the internet and don't use any paper? But no, he's got a book out that he's proud that he has printed this on recycled paper. Why not just not print the book?
Change is always going to be happening with the climate system. It never just stops and remains a static thing. Sea level will always be rising or falling. It will never just be level. Temperature will always be rising or falling. It will never be just level. Same for all the components of the climate system.
There is no doubt about the urgency of the climate change crisis, and you will not hear anyone in this administration question the science. The time for denial, delay, and dispute is over, and the time to act is now.
Knowing what you know now, is the debate really over, or has it just begun?
Carbon neutral, carbon free. Save the planet, hug a tree. Going vegan, going green. Turning eco-fear into a cash machine. And I don't care about being sustainable, the touched and debridable masses are going hysterical. The atmospherical gases are just fine. Don't you worry about dirt, people. Wind them up and just watch them wind. Dirt, people. I'm just about to lose my mind. And I don't care about the branch Algorian telling you a story and people. The freak organical, let's all panical people. We're just fine. Eco-friendly, eco-chic. Constant nagging from an eco-geek. Drive a hybrid, ride a bike. Take a walk, why don't you take a hike? And I don't care about biodegradable, masqueradable phonies. If they were deciding we would all be riding on ponies, that ain't right. I'm talking about dirt people, whacked out environmentally ill. I say dirt people, they don't care how many jobs they kill. And I don't care about the ecological, pathological people. The most composting is we're all socialist people. They ain't right. Let me tell you about dirt people. Wind them up and just watch them wind. Dirt people. Now I'm just about to lose my mind. Dirt people. I don't care nothing about being cool. I say dirt people. I guess I'm just an old